The Isles Before History. Before there was Britain, there were only the islands, green, windswept, and half lost in mist. Long before written words, before kingdoms and kings, this land was shaped by ice and sea. As glaciers melted at the end of the last ice age, they carved valleys and lochs, raising the hills of Scotland and the plains of England. The sea crept in, and the island took form. A lonely mass at the edge of Europe, gazing west toward the unknown. Here the first people came, hunters following herds across frozen ground, then gatherers and farmers as the climate softened. They left quiet traces, stones lifted into circles, barrows built for the dead, and marks etched into rock. At Stonehenge, great sarsen stones still stand, casting long shadows at solstice dawn. A monument to belief, to community, to time itself. The Neolithic people who raised them knew nothing of empires or nations. Their world was smaller but no less mysterious. They farmed the soil, shaped flint tools, and watched the seasons pass, tied to the rhythm of the earth. As the Bronze and Iron Ages dawned, new peoples came, tribes from across the sea. They brought metal, trade, and stories. Hill forts rose on the ridges of Wessex and Wales. Warriors carried swords of shining bronze, and druids whispered their rites among the oaks. The island was not yet Britain. To its inhabitants it was Albion, a place of hills and rivers, of spirits and ancestors, living beneath the vast turning sky. This was the world that awaited the first great tide of history to roll ashore. Rome and the birth of Britannia. When Rome came to Britain, it came with iron, order, and ambition. In the year 43 CE, Emperor Claudius sent his legions north across the Channel, a shimmering army of disciplined men marching beneath the eagle standard. To them, this misty land was a frontier, a challenge, and a prize. They met fierce resistance. Tribes like the Iceni and Trinovantes, the Catuvallani and Brigantes, fought to defend their homes. Among them rose Boudica, queen of the Iceni, tall, fierce, her hair said to blaze red in the sun. After Roman soldiers mistreated her and her daughters, she led a rebellion that burned Londinium and Camulodunum to ash. But the Roman legions, relentless and disciplined, crushed her uprising. The story of Boudica is one of defiance, a cry that still echoes through the centuries, the voice of a people unwilling to be tamed. Rome built more than it destroyed. Across the island rose roads and towns, baths and amphitheaters, temples and villas. Latin words mingled with Celtic ones. Roman gods shared space with older deities of forest and river. The Romans called this province Britannia. Its capital, Londinium, became a bustling port of trade and politics. Soldiers guarded Hadrian's Wall in the north, a stone serpent cutting through the hills, marking the edge of empire. Beyond it lay the wild lands of Caledonia, home to tribes who would never yield. Life in Roman Britain was a blend of the old and the new. In the villas of the wealthy, mosaic floors gleamed with scenes of myth. In towns, merchants sold olive oil, wine, and pottery from the Mediterranean. Yet beyond the walls the native Britons still herded cattle and spoke their own tongues, living by older ways. Over time these worlds merged, the conquerors and the conquered shaping one another in quiet, enduring ways. But empires, like tides, always recede. By the early 400s CE, the Roman world was fracturing. The legions were called home to defend Italy and Gaul. Governors and generals left their posts. Britannia was left behind, half Roman, half native, standing on its own for the first time in centuries. The baths cooled, the villas fell silent, and the roads grew over with grass. In their absence came new storms from the sea, a new wave of raiders and settlers who would change the island once again. The Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons. As Rome's memory faded, Britain became a mosaic of small kingdoms. The Anglo-Saxons arrived, people from the coasts of what are now Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. They came first as mercenaries, then as settlers, carving out lands for themselves. The Celts were pushed to the edges, into Wales, Cornwall, and Scotland, while the newcomers built their own realms, Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and others. These were centuries of legend and hardship. The old Roman towns decayed, and life grew simpler, humbler, but not without beauty. The Saxons tilled the land, spoke in an earthy, rhythmic tongue, the root of English itself, and told tales of monsters and heroes. The poem of Beowulf, though older still, echoes their world, a place of hall fires, feasts, and fierce loyalty, where fate was a living force, but peace was never permanent. From across the northern seas came another people, the Vikings. In long ships that sliced through the waves like knives, they came first to raid, then to conquer and settle. Monasteries burned. Lindisfarne in 793 CE was the first to fall, and its monks fled in terror. The North Sea became a highway for fear and fire. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were farmers, traders, and explorers, bringing new connections to the world beyond. Towns like York, then Jorvik, became thriving Norse centers. The Danelaw divided England, Viking law in the north and east, Saxon rule in the south. It was a time of shifting borders and fragile truces. Amid this turmoil rose one of England's most remarkable kings, Alfred the Great of Wessex. He fought not just with the sword but with learning. Alfred built defenses, promoted education, and translated classical works into English so his people might know their past. His vision of a united English realm would outlive him. Over the next century that vision grew. Kings like Aethelstan, Alfred's grandson, brought the kingdoms together, forging the beginnings of what we now call England. Yet the Viking shadow never vanished. Their blood, language, and customs mixed into the island's fabric. Norse words still pepper the English tongue, from sky and window to husband and law. By the early 11th century, the island itself reflected this mingled heritage. The line between Saxon and Dane blurred, until even the crown of England rested on a Viking head. King Canute, ruler of a North Sea empire stretching to Denmark and Norway. He reigned wisely, maintaining peace and piety. Yet when his dynasty faded, new rivals rose once more. And so the island, restless and ever-changing, stood again on the brink of invasion. Across the Channel, a duke in Normandy watched and waited, his ambitions set upon England's green shores. His name was William, and his coming would mark one of the most dramatic turns in British history. The Normans. In the year 1066, the winds shifted over the English Channel. A comet burned across the sky, a sign, people said, of destiny, and destiny came with sails and steel. William, Duke of Normandy, crossed from the northern coast of France with an army of knights and archers. His claim to the English throne came from Edward the Confessor, the saintly king who had died childless. But another man, Harold Godwinson, had been crowned instead. Two rivals, two claims, and one fateful battle. On the fields near Hastings, the Saxons stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields locked tight. The Normans attacked again and again, their arrows darkening the sky. As the day waned, Harold fell, an arrow said to have pierced his eye, and the Saxon shield wall broke. The Normans had come to stay. William became William the Conqueror, and England was forever changed. He brought with him the language of the French court, the architecture of stone castles, and the iron order of feudalism. The old English nobility was swept away, replaced by Norman lords who owed everything to the king. Across the countryside, new fortresses rose: Tower of London, Windsor, Durham, and hundreds more. They were symbols of both protection and power, their keeps towering above villages that once belonged to free men. For the people who lived beneath them, life was hard, ruled by distant lords, taxed in grain and labor. But out of this harsh new order, something lasting emerged, a kingdom more unified, more organized, and more connected than before. The Normans catalogued their conquest. In 1086, William ordered a survey, the Domesday Book. Every cow, every acre, every soul was counted and recorded, a snapshot of medieval England unlike any other in Europe. To its people it felt final, as if judgment itself had come, and the record would never fade. Under Norman rule, stone churches rose where wooden ones had stood. Latin prayers filled the air. The English language absorbed French words until it became a rich, layered blend. The beginnings of the tongue we speak today. Conqueror, even he could not conquer death. He died in 1087, and his sons quarreled over his legacy. Over the next century, the Norman kings faced rebellion, ambition, and war. But they had forged something enduring, a kingdom that could no longer be undone by a single battle. England had been conquered, but also created anew. The Plantagenets. From the Normans rose another dynasty, the Plantagenets, a name that would dominate England for over 3 centuries. They were brilliant, flawed, and fierce. Their story is one of empire, conflict, and the slow awakening of a people's voice. It began with Henry II, crowned in 1154. He ruled not just England, but vast lands in France, a realm stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. Henry was a reformer, shaping law and governance in ways that still echo today. His courts replaced the rule of the sword with the rule of law, and the seeds of common justice were planted in English soil. But even the greatest kings are haunted by their choices. Henry's fierce temper and his struggle with the church led to tragedy: the murder of Thomas Becket, Archbishop of Canterbury, in 1170. When the king's knights struck him down before the altar, Europe recoiled in horror. Henry walked barefoot to Canterbury in penance, his authority humbled before faith. After Henry came his son Richard the Lionheart, the warrior king of the Crusades. He spent little time in England, seeing it as a treasury to fund his holy wars abroad. When he died, his brother John inherited the throne, and with him came unrest. John's rule was heavy-handed, his taxes steep, his failures costly. The barons rebelled, and in 1215 he was forced to seal the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. It was meant to limit royal power and guarantee certain rights. Not for all, but for some. Yet it planted a seed that would grow across the centuries. The idea that even a king must answer to the law. The Plantagenets ruled a restless realm. Their later kings, Edward I, Edward II, and Edward III, waged wars in Wales and Scotland, building castles and claiming crowns. Edward I subdued the Welsh, his great fortresses still standing on the hills of Snowdonia. He fought to bring Scotland under English rule, but resistance rose under William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, whose names still echo through the glens. In the 14th century, England faced two great trials: war and plague. The 100 Years' War with France began under Edward III, a conflict of chivalry, pride, and shifting fortunes. Victories like Crécy and Poitiers made legends of English archers, their longbows cutting through armor and arrogance alike. But triumph faded. The war dragged on, draining gold and spirit alike. Then came the Black Death. Between 1348 and 1351, the plague swept through towns and villages, taking perhaps half the population. Fields went untended, markets silent, churches full of grief. And yet, from tragedy came change. Labor grew scarce, and peasants began to demand more. More pay, more freedom, more recognition. In 1381, they rose in revolt under Wat Tyler, marching on London to confront King Richard II. Though the rebellion failed, its message could not be silenced. The old order was beginning to shift. As the Plantagenet line aged, it fractured. Ambition turned inward. Cousin fought cousin in the brutal Wars of the Roses. The White Rose of York against the Red Rose of Lancaster. Battles like Towton and Bosworth soaked the land in blood. And when the dust settled, one man stood victorious: Henry Tudor, a Welsh-born noble with a slender claim and a powerful destiny. The Plantagenets were gone. The Tudors had arrived. 6. The Tudors and the Stuarts. The Tudor age began with Henry VII, cautious and calculating, who restored peace after decades of civil war. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who would etch the dynasty into history's memory. Henry was bold, charismatic, and unyielding. A Renaissance prince who longed for glory and sons. When the Pope refused to grant him a divorce from Catherine of Aragon, Henry broke from Rome. Thus began the English Reformation, not from theology, but from power and passion. He made himself head of the Church of England, dissolving monasteries and seizing their wealth. Across the land, abbeys fell into ruin, their stones carted away, their songs silenced. 6 wives would share Henry's fate, some divorced, some executed, few at peace. But his legacy was larger than scandal. He reshaped religion, government, and national identity. England would never again bow to the authority of Rome. His daughter, Elizabeth I, inherited a kingdom divided by faith, but rich in ambition. The Stuarts of Scotland. James VI of Scotland became James I of England, uniting the crowns of the two realms. A new era began, one of uneasy unity and growing tension. James believed in the divine right of kings. Parliament, by now stronger and more vocal, disagreed. His son Charles I inherited that tension and fanned it into flame. Charles demanded obedience. Parliament demanded limits. When neither would yield, England fell into civil war. The Royalists fought beneath the banner of the king. The parliamentarians rallied under men like Oliver Cromwell. Brother fought brother, father against son. And the green fields of England turned red once more. In 1649, the unthinkable happened. King Charles I was tried, condemned, and executed, his head severed before a silent crowd in Whitehall. For the first time, England was a republic, ruled not by a monarch, but by Parliament and the army. Cromwell became Lord Protector, stern and puritanical, enforcing order with a soldier's hand. Yet, the experiment in republicanism could not last. After Cromwell's death, the people longed for stability. In 1660, the monarchy returned. With Charles II, the merry monarch, London came alive again with laughter, art, and excess. But fate struck twice. First, the Great Plague of 1665, and then the Great Fire of London the year after, which devoured the medieval city in flames. From the ashes rose a new London, cleaner, grander, crowned by Christopher Wren's St. Paul's Cathedral, a symbol of endurance and renewal. Charles's brother James II succeeded him, but his open Catholicism alarmed the nation. In 1688, Parliament invited William of Orange and his wife Mary to take the throne in what became the Glorious Revolution. No battles, no bloodshed, only a new balance of power. From that moment, England's monarchy would be constitutional, its kings and queens bound by law. The Tudors and Stuarts had transformed the island, politically, religiously, and culturally. They had turned medieval England into an early modern state, one poised for expansion beyond its shores. And as the 18th century dawned, a new power stirred on the horizon. The British Empire. Vast, complex, and unstoppable, was about to be born. The British Empire. When the 18th century dawned, Britain looked outward. The island that had once been a Roman province now commanded fleets that spanned the oceans. Trade, ambition, and invention propelled it into a new age, an age of empire. At first, it was commerce that drew Britain across the seas. Companies such as the East India Company traded spices, silk, and tea, carrying not only goods but influence. Colonies took root in North America, in the Caribbean, in Africa, and along the shores of India. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton flowed homeward. Textiles, guns, and capital flowed outward. It was an age of exploration, but also of exploitation, a world driven by wealth and empire's hunger. In the 1700s, Britain fought rivals for dominance: France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic. The 7 Years' War ended with Britain in possession of Canada and much of India, a global empire in miniature. Yet victory carried cost. In the American colonies, resentment grew against taxes and control from London. In 1776, the 13 colonies declared independence, and after years of war, Britain lost its first great empire. But even in loss, new horizons appeared. Explorers like James Cook charted the Pacific, mapping New Zealand and the eastern coast of Australia. Botany Bay became a penal colony. Soon, settlers followed, building new societies under the Union Jack. Africa, India, and Asia beckoned. Lands of trade, of conquest, of complicated alliances. At home, Britain changed in ways no one had ever seen before. The Industrial Revolution transformed it from an agrarian land to a powerhouse of machines and mills. Steam engines drove trains and ships. Factories lit up the night. Cities swelled. Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, each humming with labor and soot. The empire was fed by this new energy, and in turn fed it. Raw materials from across the globe returned as finished goods. By the 19th century, Britain was the workshop of the world. Its navy ruled the waves. Its flag flew on every continent. But beneath the grandeur lay contradictions. The slave trade, which had enriched ports like Bristol and Liverpool, came under fierce moral challenge. Voices like William Wilberforce and the abolitionists demanded its end. And in 1807, the trade was outlawed. Slavery itself abolished in the empire in 1833. London became the capital of a world network, proud, wealthy, confident. But even at its height, the seeds of change were sown. National movements stirred in India, Ireland, and beyond. Writers and thinkers began to question the moral cost of empire, the suffering it caused, the voices it silenced. By the dawn of the 20th century, cracks had begun to show. And in 1914, the age of empire was interrupted by a thunderclap that would shake the world Wars. In August 1914, Britain entered the First World War. A conflict unlike any before it. It began with the assassination of an archduke, but soon engulfed empires and continents. For Britain, it was a call to defend allies and maintain balance in Europe. Young men volunteered in their thousands, believing the war would be short, even glorious. It was not. On the Western Front, trench lines scarred the soil of France and Belgium. Mud, gas, and wire defined a generation. Battles like the Somme, Ypres, and Passchendaele became names of sorrow. Industrial war consumed millions. Machines replaced knights. Courage met futility. At home, women filled factories, drove ambulances, and worked the fields. Their labor kept the country alive, and their voices for equality grew louder. When the armistice came in 1918, Britain had won. But victory felt hollow. Nearly 1 million British soldiers were dead, and the empire itself had been shaken. The map of the world was redder than ever, yet the spirit of empire was already waning. Between the wars, Britain tried to rebuild. The 1920s brought uncertainty. The 1930s, depression and doubt. Fascism rose in Europe, and storm clouds gathered once more. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and Britain declared war again. The Second World War was total. Cities were bombed. Children were evacuated. The nation lived through blackout and rationing. When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister, he spoke not of surrender, but of perseverance. Of fighting on beaches, in fields, in the air. The Battle of Britain raged in the skies of 1940, when the Royal Air Force held off the might of the Luftwaffe. London burned in the Blitz, yet its people endured, gathering in the underground as bombs fell above. Allies came from across the empire, from Canada, India, Africa, Australia, and beyond. Men and women from every corner of the British world fought side by side. Slowly the tide turned. The war reached its climax in 1945 with victory in Europe, and, months later, in Asia. But the cost was immense. Cities shattered, economies drained, and millions of lives lost. When peace returned, Britain was changed. The empire that had once seemed eternal was exhausted, and a new world order was forming. The United States and the Soviet Union rose to dominance. Britain remained proud and resilient, but it was clear that a chapter of history had closed. Developed too that it was decolonization and modern Britain. After the war, the sun began to set on the empire that had once never known night. The colonies, long controlled from afar, sought independence. In India, Gandhi's campaign of nonviolence had already set a movement in motion. In 1947, India and Pakistan gained independence, ending nearly 2 centuries of British rule. The partition was painful, marked by migration and loss. But it signaled a wider transformation. Across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, independence movements followed. Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Jamaica, Malaysia. One by one, nations stepped into their own futures. Britain, though reluctant at times, often oversaw the transition peacefully, recognizing the winds of change that could not be held back. By the 1960s, the empire had become a commonwealth of nations, a voluntary association of equals, bound by shared history and language rather than conquest. At home, Britain faced its own transformations. The war had leveled class boundaries and opened new possibilities. The National Health Service was founded in 1948. Free health care for all, a bold promise of equality. Reconstruction reshaped cities. The welfare state sought to protect citizens from cradle to grave. Immigration from the Commonwealth brought new life and diversity. The arrival of the Windrush generation from the Caribbean in 1948 marked the beginning of modern multicultural Britain. New voices, new food, new music filled the streets of London, Birmingham, and Manchester. Yet integration was not easy. Prejudice and inequality lingered. Britain was learning, slowly, what it meant to be both old and new. Rooted in tradition, yet global in reality. The latter half of the 20th century was a story of adaptation. The Suez Crisis of 1956 revealed Britain's reduced global power. The empire was gone, but influence remained. The 1970s brought economic turmoil and industrial unrest, followed by political change under Margaret Thatcher. In the 1980s, her government embraced free markets and privatization, reshaping the nation's economy and identity. For some, it was renewal. For others, loss. Through it all, the monarchy endured. The reign of Queen Elizabeth II, beginning in 1952, became a thread of continuity through decades of transformation. A symbol of duty, service, and quiet strength. Britain joined the European Economic Community in 1973, linking its fate once more to the continent it had often stood apart from. In later years, the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 brought peace to Northern Ireland after decades of conflict, showing again Britain's capacity to evolve and reconcile. As the 21st century dawned, Britain faced new challenges: globalization, cultural change, and questions of identity. The decision to leave the European Union in 2016 revealed deep divisions, but also a continuing desire for self-determination, an echo, perhaps, of the independence that had shaped the island for millennia. Modern Britain is a mosaic of history and hope, tradition and reinvention. Its skyline holds both ancient cathedrals and glass towers. Its people trace roots to every corner of the earth. Though the empire is gone, its legacy, in language, law, and culture, endures across the globe. And the island that once sent explorers outward now looks inward, asking what it means to be British in an interconnected world. Closing reflections. And so, as night deepens and the story draws to a close, we return to where it began, the island itself. From the first hunter crossing a land bridge of ice, to the hum of London's modern streets, Britain's story is one of transformation without end. Conquerors have come and gone, empires have risen and fallen, yet the land endures, its hills and rivers carrying echoes of all who lived before. Every age has left its mark. The Roman roads that still trace the countryside, the Norman castles that watch over quiet towns, the spires of Tudor churches, the bridges of the industrial age, the glass towers of the present. Each layer tells a part of the same tale, of resilience, reinvention, and restless curiosity. To listen to Britain's history is to listen to the rhythm of change itself. An island forever looking outward to the sea and inward to the soul. A people shaped by invasion and imagination, by empire and empathy. A nation small in size, vast in memory. So now, let the past drift gently into dream. Let the names, Rome, Viking, Norman, Tudor, Empire, fade like stars before dawn. For history, like sleep, is never an ending, only a turning of the page, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a new chapter of the island's story waits to be told.